Saturday morning at Garnet Cove was supposed to smell like coffee and cold lake air, not diesel and hot metal. I stood at the end of my gravel driveway, mug still warm in my hand, watching a flatbed tow truck back toward my boat. The hook chain dragged low, throwing sparks across the stones, and behind it stood Patrice Holloway, president of the HOA, arms crossed, visor on, wearing that smug smile people get when they think the law is just whatever came out of their mouth 5 seconds ago. Section 4, Article 9, she snapped. Watercraft stored on residential lots may not exceed 22 feet in overall length. My boat was 24, 2 feet. She thought she was enforcing HOA rules on a neighborhood lake. She was standing beside a lake she didn't own. My name is Weston Dalloway. I'm 61, retired, and I spent 32 years as a licensed marine surveyor. You do that long enough, you learn the truth is usually buried in old deeds nobody bothered to read. My wife Marlene and I moved to Garnet Cove in central Tennessee in 2020 because we wanted peace. We found 43 houses around a dark spring-fed Lake Cypress on the banks and bass big enough to make a grown man emotional. We bought a 1.4-acre lot with a private dock. The previous owner, Rufford Haynes, had died without a will, so the estate liquidated fast. We got a fair price, a thick deed packet, and what I thought was a quiet place to grow old. What I didn't understand was that Garnet Cove had an HOA run by Patrice Holloway, and Patrice didn't see herself as a volunteer. She saw herself as a ruler. She quoted community standards like scripture and enforced them selectively. Greta, a 73-year-old widow down the road, got written up for mailbox color and wind chime audibility. My first run-in with her came 6 weeks after we moved in. I was in the garage working on my Grady White when I heard her sandals crunch up the gravel. She stood there with a clipboard eyeing my boat like it had insulted her. I told her I'd look into the size rule. I spent a Sunday afternoon reading Garnet Cove's CC&Rs. She was right about the rule. Boats stored on residential lots were capped at 22 feet. Mine was 24. But I drove the neighborhood loop. 3 other houses had oversized boats. One was Douglas Ferret's battered old pontoon. None of them had notices. So I responded politely, asked for clarification on enforcement consistency, and Patrice answered by fining me anyway. Then she fined Marlene over a flower bed, wildflowers by the mailbox. We got fined $50 the next morning. I paid both fines. Not because I agreed, because I was beginning to suspect something deeper was wrong, and nothing makes a bully careless faster than an early victory. That same week, I finally sat down with the full deed package from the Haynes estate. Standard lot language, easements, utilities. Then page 54 made me stop cold. Rufford Haynes had not just owned the lot. He had owned the lake. All 62 acres of Garnet Lake sat as a separate deeded parcel attached to the property I had just bought. I called a title attorney in Nashville named Frederica Blount. She traced the chain of title back to 1961, then called me. Weston, this deed is clean. The lake parcel transferred to you. I stared out at the water. So I own the lake. You own the lake. That was the moment the whole story changed shape. Because if I owned the lake, then every fishing permit, dock rule, and water use fine the HOA had enforced for decades had been imposed on property it did not own. And Patrice had just tried to tow my boat over rules she had no right to enforce. Once I knew that I didn't storm into the clubhouse and start yelling. People like Patrice live off reaction. So I got quiet. Frederica told me to verify everything. I went to the county courthouse and found the missing piece. The HOA's founding document said its authority over common waterways only existed if those waterways had been dedicated to the community or held in common ownership. Garnet Lake had never been dedicated. Rufford Haynes had sold the lots, yes, but he kept the lake and granted only access easements. The community had access. The HOA had control of exactly nothing. That's when the story got bigger than my boat. Neighbors started talking. Douglas with his pontoon, Greta with her notebook, Alton Briggs, a quiet board member who'd been voting against Patrice for years. Then the Eaterfields, a younger couple who already knew what it meant to be on Patrice's bad side. Once word got around that I was pushing back, the stories came out. Retroactive fines, denied requests, rules used against people Patrice didn't like and ignored for the ones she did. Tamsin Eaterfield told me she'd been recording some of her conversations with Patrice legally under Tennessee's one-party consent law. On one recording, Patrice denied a dock request because Tamsin and her husband were, in her words, changing the character of the community. Suddenly, this wasn't just about boats and rules. It was about power and who got targeted when power landed in the wrong hands. Meanwhile, Patrice escalated. She threatened Douglas over his pontoon. She fined Greta under a parking rule that had already been removed from the governing documents. Then I got a call from Patrice's brother-in-law, a developer offering to buy my lake parcel if I'd just clear up the misunderstanding and drop legal action. I recorded that call too. By then, I wasn't angry anymore. We met in my garage one Saturday afternoon, 6 neighbors, a pot of Marlene's chilly cold air sneaking in under the garage door. I laid out the deed, the founding clause, the fines, the survey showing the HOA's dock extension encroached onto my parcel. Then Douglas said, "So she's been fining us on water she didn't own, using rules she didn't have the right to make." That I said is exactly what I'm saying. So we built the plan. Frederica would file a quiet title action. Another attorney would prepare a restitution claim for the money the HOA had collected under false authority. Alton would force a review of lake jurisdiction onto the agenda for the December annual meeting. Tamsin would bring the recording. I'd bring certified copies of everything. And while all of that was happening, I did the hardest thing of all. I stayed polite. I waved. I answered mail. I paid the fines. I gave Patrice nothing to rally against. Which brings us back to that Saturday morning diesel in the air tow truck backing toward my boat. The driver showed me the work order on HOA letterhead. I told him very calmly to step back from the boat. Then I called Frederica. She said, "That paper is worthless. They cannot tow personal property off private land without a court order. Do not let them touch your boat." So I didn't. The driver left. Patrice glared. The second Saturday in December came in cold and bright frost on the dock planks. The clubhouse was packed. Word had spread that something was coming. Patrice sat at the front table, composed and certain she still owned the room. Alton forced the agenda item. She tried to brush past it. He held the line. Then he looked at me and I stood up with a binder under my arm. It didn't feel dramatic. It felt solid, like stepping onto a dock you've already tested. "My name is Weston Dalloway, and after a full title review completed this fall, I can confirm that I am the owner of Garnet Lake." Patrice tried to cut me off. I held up the certified deed. Then came the HOA founding documents. Then the survey. Then the number about $34,000 in lake-related fines and fees collected over the last 12 years without legal authority. Then Tamsin stood and played the recording. Patrice's voice filled the clubhouse cold and clear, talking about people changing the character of the community. By the time it ended, even Patrice's allies weren't looking at her anymore. Then the local reporter walked in from the parking lot. So did the sheriff's deputy Frederica had requested as a civil standby. Patrice looked around the room for support and found 40 people staring back at her like they'd just realized the wizard wasn't magic, he was just mean. The quiet title action went through. The HOA didn't contest it. The court confirmed the lake parcel was mine. The restitution claim settled before trial. 29 households got money back. Douglas got enough to grin for a month. Greta bought herself a very nice kayak and a second set of wind chimes, which she hung near the property line with the joy of a woman who had earned every note. Patrice resigned in February. By April, she was gone from Garnet Cove. Alton became the new HOA president and cleaned the whole mess up, legal review, rewritten rules, apology letters. And me, I never wanted to lock the lake down and become the same kind of petty tyrant Patrice had been. So Marlene and I did the opposite. We formalized free recreational lake access for every household in Garnet Cove. We put stewardship rules in writing. We created a conservation fund in Rufford Haynes's name. 2 local high school students got scholarships from it that spring. Last 4th of July, we held a cookout by the water. Douglas tied up at the dock. Greta came laughing. The Eaterfields brought their baby. Corbett, our old beagle, wandered through everybody's legs like a tired little sheriff. And standing there at sunset, watching that dark water go gold, I had one of those realizations that comes late and hits hard. The law matters. Paper matters. Documentation matters. But what really lets small tyrants thrive is exhaustion. They count on decent people being too busy, too polite, too worn out to ask whether the rule is real, whether the authority is lawful, whether the person barking orders actually has the right to. Patrice didn't lose because I shouted louder. She lost because I kept reading. So here's the question I keep coming back to when authority gets abused for years. Is exposing the truth in public justice? Or is it a kind of revenge people only call ugly because it worked? Tell me what you think. Was Weston right to blow the whole thing open at that meeting, or should he have handled it quietly and spared the neighborhood the spectacle? And have you ever been fined, threatened, or pushed around by an HOA, a board, or some petty little gatekeeper who thought nobody would ever check the record? Drop your story and your opinion. I want to hear where you stand.